Hey, what up? Welcome back to The Theory Creep. I'm The Theory Creep, and I've been reviewing some of the videos that I've posted up until now, and I'm realizing that I might need to spend a little bit of time describing the postmodern philosophers that I'm really kind of working with here. In particular, I feel like I should work with their style a little bit, or spend a little bit of time talking about their style. The big daddy of deconstruction and postmodern, post-structuralist theory is Jacques Derrida. And his style of writing can sometimes feel a little bit more like a wandering than a developmental argument. He seems to avoid a clear expression of what it is he's trying to say. This discursive way of writing is informed by what it is Derrida is writing about. He's trying to deconstruct traditional notions of truth, that truth is singular and objective and divisible from falsehood. In the Western world, the traditional methods for arriving at truth are linear and progressive. We tend to see truth as a destination that we work towards and then get to in a final cumulative act. Derrida wants to trouble this understanding of linear developmental truth. He wants us to consider that what is real and what is false, what's authentic and what's fake, what's legitimate and illegitimate, might not be as divisible as we tend to think that it is. Because this is his objective, Derrida is limited in the tools that he can use. Barbara Johnson, a translator of Derrida's, says that he's caught in a bind. He's attempting to account for an error by means of tools derived from that very error. What she means by this is that Derrida, as a traditional Western philosopher, the only tools that he has to discuss this lack of truth, this confusing of truth, are traditional linear developmental methods of truth-telling, which are exactly what he's trying to deconstruct. So Derrida can't tell us what he thinks, because what he's trying to tell us is that it's impossible to tell someone what you think. Telling is an important verb in Derrida's writing. In fiction writing, authors tend to be told that they should show as opposed to tell. This is not true in philosophical writing. Classic philosophers tell their audiences what they're supposed to think. Derrida doesn't want to tell anyone anything. He prefers to show his audience what it is he's talking about. Because his goal is to complicate the act of telling, Derrida is limited to showing, which is generally seen as a literary or creative tool, not a philosophical or analytical tool, which is why his language seems so soft, so discursive, so non-specific. It's because he's challenging the very possibility of specificity. So the way that Derrida writes is informed by his theoretical goals. But again, this is a one-way relationship that Derrida would probably want us to complicate and turn into a two-way relationship. So we should consider that his style of writing, his discursive, hesitant kind of style, may also be influencing his theory. Derrida's difficult-to-read style is intentionally and overtly drawing attention to the impossibility of separating form and style, of separating content from form. This is another division that postmodernists like to mess with, the idea that we can separate what a piece of literature is about from how a piece of literature expresses itself. So I'd like to characterize Derrida's style of writing as a form of delay or avoidance. We see these hesitations most clearly in the beginnings and endings of his projects, where a normal author would be going out of their way to summarize and encapsulate and introduce or conclude their project. Derrida chooses these opportunities to really get expressive, really get creative, and really start to fly away from his subject. Johnson, again, has a very interesting summary of this tendency in Derrida. She says, "It is as though the borderlines of the text had to be made to bear the mark of the silence and the pathos that lie beyond its fringes, as if the text had first and last to more actively disconnect itself from the logos toward which it still aspires." So the abstract openings and closings to Derrida's projects indicate a kind of approach and avoidance of his subject. He's simultaneously disconnecting from something and connecting to it. He achieves an expression of his theory. He shows us his theory rather than telling it through an avoidance of telling. He manifests what it is he's talking about as opposed to explaining it. If this is getting a little bit hard to follow, that's by design. Derrida is intentionally producing texts that are difficult to read to challenge the possibility of reading something clearly. If that confuses you, you're not alone. This is a very confusing branch of philosophy. It's hard to follow exactly what these guys are saying because they're not saying it clearly by design. So let's bring someone else into the conversation to try to clear things up a little bit. These ideas, these postmodern, mixing, contaminated theories, they're not unique to French people in the 50s and 60s. There are old mystical notions and traditions like Taoism in the East or Sufism in the Near East that not only mirror a lot of the concepts that deconstructionists talk about, but they explain these concepts in allegorical and simple terms. Taoists were explaining contamination theory, to use a deconstructionist term, to illiterate peasants in China 4,000 years ago. Not to say that you guys are illiterate peasants. Actually, maybe I should start addressing my audience as illiterate peasants. Hey, this is the Philosophy Creep. Welcome to the Philosophy Creep, you pack of illiterate peasants. That's a little rough. That's a little harsh. So let's start talking about Chinese mysticism, in particular Taoism, just because it's something that I have a little bit of familiarity with, and I think it explains some of these theories in simpler terms than Derrida does. So to reiterate, Derrida's style is intentionally vague because he's challenging the possibility of a clear expression of anything. So in order to do this, in order to express this, he has to manifest it. He has to not give you a clear expression of his subject in order to give you a clear expression of his subject. That's confusing. There's a Taoist concept called Wu Wei Wei, Wei Wu Wei. I'm definitely saying that wrong. And it translates roughly into doing, not doing. It refers to an action arising from inaction. It indicates a kind of contamination between stillness and movement. It's this idea that we can remain still and unmoving until the correct action, the authentic action, arises naturally from inside of us. So action comes from stillness. Lao Tzu, a probably mythical Taoist sage, has this to say about Wu Wei 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 Wu Wei. He says, "In the pursuit of knowledge, every day something is added. But in the pursuit of wisdom, every day something is taken away. Less and less do you need to force things until finally you arrive at non-action." Now, non-action for a Taoist is not stillness. Non-action is a kind of natural action, a kind of action without agency, action without the self, action without intentionality. This idea that in the pursuit of wisdom, every day something is dropped is a deconstructive understanding of knowledge. Lao Tzu says that the traditional methods of achieving knowledge are developmental. You add something every day. And he says that there's another kind of knowledge, wisdom, where every day you remove something. That's what Derrida is doing. He's taking things away from the systems of truth-telling that Western culture has used for thousands of years. It's a process of delay. It's a process of discarding. It's a process of deconstruction. And this is something that's shared by deconstructionists and Taoists. So again, Western philosophy tends to see truth as an objective, as a arrival, and the search for truth as a journey, a progressive, active pursuit. So let's contrast pursuit as the Western understanding of truth-telling with practice, which may be a more Derridian or Taoist understanding of truth-telling. What's the difference between pursuit and practice? Pursuits have an end. You can pursue a piece of prey. You can pursue a romantic partner. These processes have a conclusion. They arrive at a singular objective. A practice is just something you do on a regular basis. There's no goal. Derrida's style is a practice as opposed to a pursuit. He's not trying to arrive at the goal of a coherent expression of deconstructionist philosophy. He's attempting to practice deconstructionist philosophy. The difference is that it's not objective-based. Derrida isn't trying to do anything because agency and objective-based rational thinking, those are the subjects of his deconstruction. His arguments don't develop into coherent points. They are removals, absences, and silences that must be heard. It would be a misinterpretation to read Derrida's style and the Taoist process of doing, not doing, as inactive. Like I said, these are practices. They just don't move towards a singular goal. They're just engaged in naturally following their instincts wherever they may lead them. They achieve an arrival, but it's an arrival at an absence that's created by their arrival. Through his writing, Derrida creates the negative spaces that his reader occupies with him. And through a process of discarding, the Taoist does not doing. These are active practices. They're not resisting anything. If we wanted to merge these two ideas, woo, wee, and Derrida's style of writing, we could say that what Derrida is doing is writing, not writing. He is writing the process of not writing. So one of Derrida's favorite poets is Stéphane Mallarmé. And he has a poem he has two poems called Ballet and Another Study of Dance. They're both very experimental, symbolist, I think is the form, poems about the experience of watching a ballet dancer perform a dance. Mallarmé uses a very discursive and hesitant form of writing, and this is how Derrida describes it. He says that Mallarmé has a hesitation that turns into writing. And whether intentionally or not, I think Derrida is also describing his own style when he uses this phrase, hesitation. Derrida says of Mallarmé's work that it parts with reference. It performs a circular dance, a spinning movement that avoids direct representation and places a veil over its subject. Derrida's writing moves through hesitation towards an absence, if such a thing is possible. Like Mallarmé's dancer, Derrida is orbiting a clear expression of his subject. He spins and spins around what he wants to say until he shows us it by concealing it. There's a veiling, which is another word that Mallarmé uses a lot going on here. Derrida veils his subject, and it's in the creases of the veil that we see what it is he's talking about. It's like he's walking in circles around a very dark pit, and the only way we can see it is by looking at the orbit of Derrida around it. We tend to understand power as direct and effective. When we have power over something, we can change it, we can control it, we can understand it. But Derrida's hesitation provides us with a very different model of power. He's not working towards a distinct goal. He's not trying to achieve a coherent objective. He's not trying to overcome an obstacle. Derrida uses a soft touch and moves around his subject instead of through it. He avoids a direct expression of his point because, again, he's deconstructing the possibility of direct expression. If he were to use direct, powerful approaches where he tries to dismantle obstacles directly, move through objectives into other objectives, if he were to try to progress and develop an argument, he would be undermining the argument that he's trying to make. This suspicion of hierarchies is also present in Taoism. Lao Tzu says, "Whether you go up the ladder or down it, your position is shaky. When you stand with your feet on the ground, you will always keep your balance." Lao Tzu is suggesting a certainness in abandoning certainty, a steadiness in abandoning hierarchies. Whether someone is writing from within truth, from within power, or they're writing against it, they're in an unstable dyad. Counter-identification, just flat-up rebellion for the sake of rebellion, falls into the trap of manifesting that which it's attacking. Likewise, Derrida isn't writing against Platonic notions of truth and linear developmental argumentation. He's writing around them. His project isn't to replace an old understanding of truth with a new understanding of truth. His goal is to contaminate truth with falseness and create a third space between the two poles where they can mix. This is mirrored in the Taoist symbol of the yin-yang or the yi-ching, which we'll throw up here. In it, we see white manifesting black and black manifesting white. This symbol in Chinese mysticism indicates that chaos manifests order and that order manifests chaos. It's a very early representation of the contamination principle that Derrida talks about in The Law of Genre. Although The Law of Genre is an essay that appears in a collection called Acts of Literature, Derrida isn't directly referring to literary genres when he uses the term in this case. What he's encouraging us to do is to think of genre as the possibility of differentiating anything from anything. It could refer to poetic genres or literary genres, but it could also refer to physical and scientific genres, to legal genres, to class-based genres. Really, the possibility of division at all is the subject of this essay. But again, Derrida can't tell us exactly what the subject of this essay is. He has to show us. So he starts the paper with two sentences. I will not mix genres, and genres are not to be mixed. He proceeds to give us a plethora of readings of these two sentences. He tells us that they could be a promise. I promise not to mix genres. He says that it could be a law. The law says not to mix genres. What Derrida is doing is he's confusing the possibility of a statement at all. He's hesitantly walking us through all the possible meanings of these two sentences. His final interpretation of these two sentences is as a wager. And it's as a wager that he introduces the concept of contamination, a counter law of contamination. He says, unless, of course, I were actually implicated in a wager, a challenge, an impossible bet. In short, a situation that would exceed the matter of merely engaging a commitment from me. And suppose, for a moment, that it were impossible not to mix genres. What if there were, lodged within the heart of the law itself, a law of impurity, or a principle of contamination? And suppose the condition for the possibility of the law were the a priori of a counter law, an axiom of impossibility that would confound its sense, order, and reason. So that's a long Derrida quote. We should probably work with it a little bit. So he's saying that the law of genre might be a bet. What would that mean? That means that someone is betting you that you can't mix genres, or betting you that you won't mix genres. Derrida says it's an impossible bet, which to me makes me think of a casino. And in a casino, you have the house, you have truth, you have power, you have authority, and then you have the customers, the people who are giving to the house. The house always wins. So if the house bets you that you can't mix genres, or that you won't mix genres, it's a pretty safe bet that you are going to end up mixing genres. The house will have established the rules such that genres will always be mixed. There would be an a priori rule in the casino that genres will be mixed. A priori, if you don't know what that means, just means it comes before. So before the bet that I think that you can't mix genres or you won't mix genres, there's a rule in place that says genres will be mixed. So content and form are another kind of genre that Derrida is mixing here. His content is, as I just discussed, the counter law, the principle of contamination, but his form is a hesitant one. Although he does ultimately express this counter law, it's done in about a paragraph, and it takes about 5 or 6 pages of hesitantly discussing other potential interpretations of the law of genre before he gets to his final counter law. This hesitation manifests the counter law before it appears. We hear 3, 4, 5 different interpretations of the law of genre before we start to think maybe there is no law of genre. Maybe all of these laws are accurate and true. Maybe one isn't above the other. Derrida is contaminating genre by contaminating different laws of genre. So he says, this is one interpretation of the law of genre. This is another interpretation of the law of genre. Genres, for Derrida, are any kind of distinction. So these are genres, different genres of the law of genre. Before he tells you about the principle of contamination, he shows it to you by contaminating these genres of the law of genre. He engages the reader in a prolonged, delayed act of hesitation. Together, you and Derrida wander through all the potential interpretations of the law. And like I said, you probably start to think about the principle of contamination before Derrida even mentions it. This is the literary principle of showing over telling. And again, it's unique in the philosophical world. Usually it's a creative writing trope. Lao Tzu says that we join spokes together in a wheel, but it's the central space that makes the wagon move. What he means by that is that we work with being, but non-being is what we use. Again, these are genres, being and non-being. And Lao Tzu is contaminating them. Another example Lao Tzu gives is a vase. We work with clay to make the outer shell of a vase, but it's the emptiness inside of it that we fill with water. Lao Tzu is contaminating that which is clay with that which isn't empty space. The metaphor of the wheel is a really good one because it's about movement, right? Forward movement is achieved through a mixing of space and material. Just like Derrida's writing advances itself with writing and not writing, with what he says and what he doesn't say, with showing and telling. The poems by Mallarmé that we're talking about appeared in a book called Wanderings. And that's also what Derrida is doing here. He's wandering. There's no goal. There's no end in sight. It's a practice of going for a walk as opposed to a journey with a destination. So I want to close with a full stanza of the Tao Te Ching. that I think is extremely relevant to what it is we're talking about in this video. It reads, "When a superior man hears of the Tao, he immediately begins to embody it. When an average man hears of the Tao, he half believes it and half doubts it. When a foolish man hears of the Tao, he laughs out loud. And if he didn't laugh, it wouldn't be the Tao. Thus it is said, the path into light seems dark. The path forward seems to go back. The direct path seems long. True power seems weak. True purity seems tarnished. True steadfastness seems charitable. True clarity seems obscure. The greatest art seems unsophisticated. The greatest love seems indifferent. The greatest wisdom seems childish. The Tao is nowhere to be found, yet it nourishes and completes all things." So, very briefly, we have in the second stanza a contamination of seeming and being, right? So, for example, the direct path, the true direct path, seems to be long. So, how can something seem to be one thing but be another? Like, we could take this literally, that it seems like we're traveling for a long time, but really we're taking the most direct route. But what Lao Tzu is doing here is he's saying that directness is roundabout, that clarity is obscure. It's not that I'm being clear, but I seem obscure. It's that in order to be clear, I must be obscure. That's not why I bring this stanza up. What interests me is the last sentence of the first paragraph. When a foolish man hears of the Tao, he laughs out loud. If he didn't laugh, it wouldn't be the Tao. I guess that's two sentences. That line has always resonated with me, and I've never fully understood what Lao Tzu was trying to say with it. The best theory I can come up with refers to Derrida and deconstruction and, in general, subversive expression. When I explain these theories to people, I usually get the same reaction, and that is like, duh, well, this is simple shit. Obviously, subjectivity plays a role in how we determine reality. Obviously, truth isn't singular. Obviously, there's different perspectives on what's authentic and what's not. And they're right. I don't think they're wrong. I think this is a true assessment of what's going on. The reality is that post-structuralists and postmodernists don't deal with new, novel, interesting concepts. They just play in the mud. Where other disciplines want to push things forward and advance the frontiers of what it is they're studying, postmodernists really just want to patrol old ground like World War II holdouts on some Pacific island. We tend to expect theory to break new ground. We tend to expect liberal arts or scientists to show us a new atom or a new way of being in the world or a new technology or a new electric engine, or, again, in the humanities, it might be philosophical. It might be a new ethical approach like utilitarianism or game theory or whatever Ayn Rand did. Evil, that's what it was, right? Or if you're just evil like Ayn Rand. That's not what deconstructionists do. Deconstructionists don't advance things. They deal with common, mundane subjects. The duh reaction to postmodern theory should remind us of a similar reaction to abstract art, and that is, this is so simple, my child could paint it. So the initiated consumer of postmodern or deconstructionist philosophy responds to this by trying to help the reader decode the work. They say, like, well, you don't have the context. This is where this writer was born. This is who he's writing against. These are the themes that he's dealing with. And what this approach to educating people does is it reinforces a very anti-postmodern idea. And that is that the truth is something that can be decoded, that there's a hierarchy between people who understand things and people who don't, and that the people who understand things have to give information to people who don't understand things. This is literally a hierarchy that Derrida is working to deconstruct. He intentionally, despite being a wise old professor, intentionally doesn't write the way a wise old professor would write, so that he can dismantle the idea of the wise old man, which has been the purveyor of truth in Western culture really for as long as Western culture has existed. I think a better reaction to this response to postmodernism is to accept it. You're right. Postmodernism is extremely simple. There's not that much to it. The concepts are baseline. They're not novel, but they do help us navigate the world. They help us understand truth. They help us understand what we're told is real and what we're told is fake. And they help us see that these divisions are imagined more often than real. I guess some things really are just as simple as they seem. So that concludes my little talk on how to read Derrida. Maybe some of the videos I'm doing in this channel have inspired you to pick up an essay by Derrida. And I hope that these strategies can help you as you struggle through his text. I guess I'll leave you with one thing that my only Derrida professor in university told me. This was probably the single most simple and useful piece of advice he gave. He said, when you're sitting down to read something by Derrida or Jean-Luc Nancy or Levinas, any of these really dense post-structural semiotic kind of guys, don't beat yourself up if you're not understanding everything they say. Just read it. Even if you pick out one thing from your reading session, say you read for half an hour, 45 minutes, which for these kinds of authors is a long time. Even if you pick out one sentence that stands out to you, that you understand, that gets you thinking, that's a success. Because in the beginning, that's all you're going to get. You're going to get one or two ideas out of these guys that maybe stick with you and that you carry into the next essay by them you read. And that's how you build a foundation with it. You understand one thing, and maybe the next time you're going to understand two things. And it builds from there. Anyway, if you have any questions, don't hesitate. Throw a comment down in the comment section. I feel like such a douchebag saying that. Like, comment, and subscribe, guys. And if you want to get notifications for the next time I post a video, make sure to click that bell, smash the subscribe button. This has been The Theory Creep. I'm The Theory Creep. Thanks for watching.